Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Daniel Tidwell, Interim CEO at Nashville Public Television. I hope everyone's doing great tonight. Thank you so much for joining us for this special virtual Brews and Bites event. We're so excited that so many of you are able to join us this evening. We appreciate your support of NPT and of Tennessee Crossroads. And you may not know it, but Tennessee Crossroads is one of NPT's most watched and most popular programs. So we're so excited that so many of you are willing to join us and also to support Tennessee Crossroads. So please feel free to start eating and drinking, or you can wait and join along with us for each course. With us tonight is the man that you all know and love, Joe Elmore, host of Tennessee Crossroads. Everybody knows Joe. He's a great guy. We're also joined by Scott Mertie, owner of Nashville Brewing Company, who provided our beer pairings. Thank you so much, Scott, for doing
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
And Dan King is also with us, who's beverage director for Butchertown Hall. And they provided all of our wonderful food that I guess you all went to Butchertown Hall today to pick it up. So thanks to Dan and thanks to Butchertown Hall. Before I hand it off to Joe, I wanted to wish a warm welcome to all of our friends who may be on here from Dell, Nashville. Thank you for all that you do for NPT. We truly appreciate it. Couple of housekeeping things. For the best experience on Zoom for tonight's program, you might consider using the speaker view rather than the gallery view. Also, you can type any questions that you have in the chat box and we'll try to answer them during our discussion. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Joe Elmore. Joe, how are you doing?
Hey, doing great, Daniel. Thank you so much. And thank all of you out there for joining us. This is a great first ever experience for me, of course. And I want to thank you also for your support of our Keep Tennessee Crossroads traveling campaign. It's a success, all thanks to you. So we're going to have a great dinner tonight. And since we want to get started without, letting the beer get too warm and the food getting too cold, we'll go right to Dan King. Dan, tell me about this wonderful appetizer that you whipped up for us from Butchertown Hall.
Yeah, gladly. So the first course we're eating tonight is queso. And, everybody knows queso. If you've been to your favorite Mexican restaurant, you're probably familiar with queso. What sets ours apart? We have, you're supposed to eat that with chips, Joe.
I'll be right back.
But ours we make with a chorizo that we make in house. So we grind the pork, we spice it right there on site, and then cook it right into the queso. So it's queso with chorizo and some pico. If you are eating the veggie option, you didn't get shorted. You are getting it with our grilled street corn, which goes on the grill. It's rubbed in chili oil, tossed in cotija cheese. It gets blackened a little bit on the wood burning grill, and it gets shaved off the cob. It goes in there with that cheese. So you guys enjoy it.
It's good with or without chips. Really good, man. Well, that's course number one, our appetizer, and I can't wait to finish this. But Scott, there you are. Why don't you tell me about the first beer we're having, your original lager?
Yeah, the first beer we're having is the Nashville Original Lager. So if everyone has not already poured it, please do so. Everyone should have gotten a sheet like this that has all three beers and talks a little bit about the beers that we're having today and pairing them with a wonderful meal from Butchertown Hall. This first beer is just our Nashville Original Lager. It's our flagship beer. It is called a German or a Bavarian Helles. Very common beer in the Munich and Bavaria area. If you've ever been there, just about any place you go to is going to have this style of beer. Helles is just German for light. When we say light, that is light in color. As you can see, it's a very clear golden lager. It is not cloudy at all. You can see right through it. So when we say light, we are talking about light in color. We are not talking about light in calories. Unfortunately, it's not a light beer. You can tell when you taste it. It is a very has a lot of malt character to it. All of the beers that we're having today are brewed according to the Reinheitsgebot, which is the German purity law from the year 1516. So this is over 500 years old, and it says that all German beers, this law said that all beers in Germany had to be made with barley malt, water, and hops, and those were the only ingredients. So to this day, Germany, all beers in Germany are still brewed to that German purity law, and we stick to that for the beers that we brew here at Nashville Brewing Company. So Nashville Lager has actually won several national and international competitions. It's won the World Beer Cup in 2018, and we still hold that title, as well as at the Great American Beer Festival last year. So this is truly an award-winning beer. Both of those had over 8,000 breweries that have entered. So I hope everyone enjoys it. Cheers.
I can see why it was a winner. I mean, this is delicious. And I got to ask you though, you know, a lot of you beer experts are kind of nerdy about your beer and the way you pour it and the glass you pour it in. By the way, mine is a Tennessee Crossroads pint glass, but thank you, Sheila.
That's what I'm drinking out of too. Yeah.
Oh, good. No, it really, you pour it a certain way, glass is a certain temperature, all that kind of stuff.
So when you pour it, lagers are generally served a little bit cooler than ales, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later in the presentation after we have our main course. But when you pour a beer, tilt your glass about 45 degrees, pour it in, then bring it up. You want to have a nice head on it. If you don't have a head, that's really not a proper way to pour a beer. But you know, not to get too nerdy, but there's not really a particular glass to drink beer out of. I know there's wine connoisseurs and there's beer nerds that always say, well, a specific glass has to go with a specific style. And, you know, that certainly can be the case. But honestly, the glass you have in front of you is perfect for the beer. As long as you can taste it, smell it, and see it. And when you really are doing a beer tasting, the first thing you want to do is pour it, hold it up, look at the bubbles. You can see the bubbles coming up from there. Is it a clear beer? Is it a cloudy beer? This particular beer is supposed to be very clear. It's a filtered beer. As you can see, it is very clear. What does it smell like? Bring it up, smell it. Does it smell hoppy? Does it smell malty? Does it smell sulfury from the yeast? All kinds of different smells. And then finally, of course, you want to taste it. Does it taste malty? Does it taste hoppy? Can you taste the alcohol? Those are all things you want to look for when tasting a beer. But ultimately, the glass doesn't really matter, Joe.
Okay, thank you. I can drink it out of a mason fruit jar if I want to, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let's move on, I guess, to course number 2, our entree. Dan, are you prepared to talk about how Butchertown Hall prepares this thing?
Yeah, of course. So this course, what you guys have in front of you is some enchiladas. And what we do, so these are smoked chicken enchiladas. At Butchertown, we're very Texas Hill Country inspired. So we do a lot of like what people would refer to as Tex-Mex. You know, it is Tex-Mex. I don't know why I say what people would refer to, but it is Tex-Mex. It's got a lot of Mexican influence, but the hill country of Texas is really unique because it's pretty and it's got a lot of wooded areas and it's people's, you know, it's the part of Texas that I really enjoy, and the food there is the best. So when you think about the hill country, you're thinking about like Austin, you're thinking about San Antonio. So places that we pretty much associate with barbecue. So at Butchertown, we're kind of known for like our brisket, and doing it in the Texas Hill Country style basically means you're getting barbecue, but you're eating it on a tortilla. So similar with these enchiladas, we're using smoked chicken that we brine and we smoke in our custom-built smoker behind the restaurant, and then pull the chicken out, pull the chicken off the bone, wrap it up in these enchiladas. And Zoraida, we have this lovely lady named Zoraida who is she's from southern Mexico, and she's basically our secret weapon. She comes up with these recipes that we probably wouldn't know how to do on our own, and she's the secret to this enchilada sauce. So it's like a family recipe for her. She doesn't have to think twice about it. She just makes a delicious enchilada sauce. And so we basically just said, hey, Zoraida, let's take your enchilada sauce and throw our twist on it, which we basically take all the fat that renders out of those briskets, and when we catch the drippings and then mix it in that sauce, so it has some of that great brisket fat flavor. So if you're eating the veggie version, you actually have a salsa verde with it, with some wood-fired mushrooms inside the enchiladas. And we're serving those with rice, but also with our barbecue, our ranch-style barbecue beans, which we actually cooked special for this program with the Nashville Amber Lager. So it's kind of a little bit paired with the beer, but also cooked with the beer. So you kind of get a little bit of a collab there.
Yeah, the sides are great. And I got to tell you a little story. I ran into one of my neighbors today who's born and bred Texan all the way. And I told her about these chicken enchiladas with the brisket fat sauce. I thought she was going to steal my food. I mean, she went crazy.
Yeah, Texans, you know, they might shoot you. You never know.
I know. I could have lost my life and the food. But no, it's wonderful. Gosh. Yeah, so do you have this on the menu?
This is something that we have had on and off the menu. Right now, our menu is a little bit abbreviated because of COVID and the winter time. But once we get back into patio season, these will definitely be back on the menu. And we'll have them available probably actually as an appetizer. So you can just kind of like try a little bit of that goodness and then get on the brisket too.
That'll be a hit. Well, Scott, your turn. What kind of beer did you select for this pairing?
All right.
It was
So
Amber Light, right?
as Dan said, the Nashville Amber was used to make those beans. And so when you pour this beer, you're going to see it's a little bit darker than the Helles Lager that we were originally drinking. It's not a dark beer by any means. It's truly what it says on the label. It's an amber beer. It's an amber lager, so it's got a nice amber tone to it. And we try to tie in all of our brands with historic areas from the style of where it came from in Europe, as well as to how that ties to Nashville's history. But Nashville Amber Lager, you see it has the state capitol building on it. In this particular style is what's referred to as a Vienna lager. And it pairs perfectly with grilled meat. So this really goes well with your entree that you're having today. It's often, compared to what you'd have at Oktoberfest is a Martin style beer. But this actually has Vienna malt versus Munich malt. It's a little bit of a difference, but very similar colors, very similar flavors. We market this as a pre-prohibition style lager, and this truly is in the late 1800s, early 1900s here in the United States. These are the types of lagers that the German immigrants were brewing at that time, for the most part, were these amber lagers. And they're obviously very popular, and now they've been making a big comeback.
Well,
yes.
Speaking of those early German brewers, Dan, you named your restaurant Butchertown Hall, which I recently learned. I recently learned that what we now know as Germantown, north of Nashville, was once called Butchertown. Tell us about that, and at the same time, tell us a little bit about your restaurant, why you named it that, and what it's all about.
Yeah, so that hill country area in Texas that I was talking about, that area was really heavily influenced by German and Eastern European immigrants that came over and settled that area. So that style of cooking, a lot of really what they brought a lot of knowledge of like butchery and how to prepare these meats really that no one wanted. It's funny, things like brisket, it's not a great cut of meat in the sense that it's not a steak or something like that, So what would happen is the butchers would get stuck with the brisket because they couldn't sell it. And so they would slow cook it and they would feed their families with it. And over time, they sort of mastered that art. Same thing with like sausages and stuff. It's like, sausage meat, it's not a steak. It's not like you take the filet mignon and you grind it up and turn it into a sausage. You're taking the stuff that, you might not be able to sell, or the scraps, your trimmings, whatever. mixing it with some substantial meat, and then grinding it, casing it into a sausage. And so when we think about like German sausages and Czech sausages, stuff like that, those immigrants that have been doing that for hundreds of years brought all of that over to the U.S. And so that was happening in the Texas Hill Country, but it was also happening right here in Nashville in the Germantown area, which was aptly called Butchertown because so many of these immigrants lived there, and there were actually cattle fields north of that area, and the cattle would come down towards Nashville, and these guys would, butcher them in their backyard and sell them off their front porch, and
Really?
and Scott can tell you more about the neighborhood because they also were pretty drinking plenty of beer while they were doing it. Apparently, there was a ton of breweries in the area too.
I want to get to that in a minute because Scott's pretty much a historian of the German brewing history and so forth. But I do want to ask, how did you get involved in all this beer craziness? I mean, you really got onto it real big time. So what's the story behind it?
Yeah, I've been passionate about beer for a long time. Actually, when I was 6 years old, I started collecting beer cans just off the side of the street. So in the 1970s, it was not uncommon for kids in the Midwest where I grew up to collect beer cans. So it was a hobby. My parents encouraged it. Of course, I was not drinking at that time, but they were giving me cans from the grocery store. My dad was doing a lot of traveling internationally, so he was bringing me back cans. And so that was my original interest, was beer can collecting. And when I went to college, I got into home brewing, started learning the to home brew. And that obviously made me kind of popular in the dorm when you're, brewing beer. And after that, I moved to Nashville, and as the craft beer industry started picking up, I became close friends with the founders of Blackstone, which Blackstone is Nashville's oldest brewery, Kent Taylor and Stephanie Weens, and they later constructed the production brewery that we're in today in the background that Dan and I are both in, and this is where we brew our Nashville brewing brands as well. But during that time, I really got into collecting outside of cans, other pre-prohibition brewiana, and just that became a passion of mine, and that's how it all went, Joe.
Okay, man, that's a great story.
I would like to add real fast, if you don't mind, what Dan was saying about Butchertown, or Germantown, also known as Butchertown. But as Dan said, there were a number of German immigrants that came into that area with their trades, butchering being one of them. But also there were 4 breweries that operated in Germantown simultaneously in the 1860s. And they were all within just a few blocks of where Butchertown Hall is today.
That is fascinating. What a great story. I got to ask you a question, though, a more modern day question.
Yeah.
Some of us who aren't aficionados exactly might wonder, we've had 2 lagers here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference in, say, a lager and an amber?
Okay,
pale ale.
So a amber, you can have an amber ale or you can have an amber lager. So really beer is like wine, where you have red wine and white wine, and then all kinds of different varieties underneath both categories. Beer, you have lagers and you have ales. And those are really the 2 different styles. And the only difference is the yeast that is used and the temperature that it's fermented. And going back thousands of years, Joe, all beer was ale. Lager is referred to as a new style of beer, although it's about 1,000 years old, but it's thought of as a new style of beer. And for really about 13,000 years, all beer was ale. It was fermented with natural airborne yeast. In fact, they really thought that beer was discovered by someone in the Middle East, had a loaf of bread, left it outside in a bowl or a plate. It rained. That bread got soggy. Natural airborne yeast started fermenting those starches in the bread. Those sugars convert into alcohol with the airborne yeast, created alcohol in this soggy bread, and then some brave soul went and tasted it, got a buzz, and thought, we need to figure out how to replicate this. So that's really how ale came about, yes. And and the Romans then brought that into Europe. As they were building their roads, they brought that brewing process, and it really took off in northern France, Belgium, England, and of course Germany, and also throughout Central Europe. And
Well,
over the years, lagers developed because this is kind of a crazy rule, but in the Middle Ages, they outlawed brewing in the summer months because they have a fire hazard, because everything was open fire brew kettles at the time, and towns would burn down because of these fires. But the other reason, the more important reason, is they knew that bacteria would spread faster in the beer and contaminate the beer in the warmer months. And they didn't have a microscope. They really didn't know why that was happening. So they would take the beer, since they couldn't brew it in the summer, they would brew a bunch in the spring, right as the brewing season would end, and put it in caves and pack those caves with ice. And over the years, the ale yeast started dying off. It wouldn't survive in those cooler temperatures. But another type of yeast started to survive. It's the survival of the fittest. And over centuries, this lager yeast started developing, and it would ferment at much cooler temperatures and take longer to ferment, but the beer would come out differently. And one thing it came out was a much clearer beer. And the reason for that is over that lagering period, lager is German just to store or to age. So while that beer was aged in the caves, all the tiny particles would settle down. And so when they did draw the beer out, it would be a much clearer beer. And that's really where lager came from.
Well, that's pretty interesting history. I never knew that. Most of us didn't know it all started with a piece of soggy bread either. That's great. Listen, Scott, I got to tell you, we got something special here. About 10 years ago, you mentioned your fascination with beer can collecting as a child and so forth, and it's a passion that kind of grew. I think got out of hand almost. 10 years ago, Gretchen Bates did a story on you and your collection. So let's walk down and drink down memory lane a little bit, okay?
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, that was 10 years ago.
Well, next up, a story about a Middle Tennessee guy who likes beer. Nothing unusual about that, of course, except this guy sometimes likes the containers the beer comes in just as much as the brew. Gretchen Bates takes us to the home of this Brentwood accountant whose obsession can be considered outrageous.
Pratt takes the snap, drops back. DeMarco's open. Oh, but he can't hang on.
Man, I can't believe he dropped that ball.
I know it.
I'm thirsty. Mind if I grab a beer?
Oh, please do. Grab one for myself, too. They're in the garage.
Okay, great. What kind do you want?
Said I was collecting beer cans my entire life. Started when I was about 6 years old.
Meet Scott Mertie, accountant, author, beer can collector. Did it bother you that he started at 6?
No, not really. No, I knew he wasn't drinking them. He started bringing the beer cans home, and then I helped him, and I took him to some beer can shows when he was little, and then when I was traveling, I'd bring him back beer cans all the time.
Before I knew it, I have over 3,000 cans now. I started out stacking them in pyramids in my bedroom, and then we ran out of space and we moved to the rec room and built shelves, and now I keep them all in my garage.
And what does your wife think about your garage?
She's fine with them in the garage. She don't like them inside, though.
Scott, tell us about these cans.
Well, these cans show a little bit of history of the beer can, which started in 1935. Initially, they were flat top cans, as the pull tab was not invented. This Budweiser can actually has instructions on the side telling users how to open the can from the top. They were given a church key with every six-pack, which was a can opener, to open the top. And this is a series of Rolling Rock cans from a flat top to a cone top, which can companies initially tried to sell these to breweries because they didn't have to replace their bottling line. So the cans would go straight through on the same bottling line that bottles would, but the users did not like these because they would not stack in ice boxes.
Although Scott was an avid collector before coming to Nashville, a visit to a Music City restaurant took his hobby to another level.
I moved to Nashville in 1992, straight out of college, and at that time I was always looking for good German food and beer, and someone told me about the Gerst House, which was in its second location. So I went there for dinner and saw the Oompa band, and that's actually when I first found out that there was a brewery in Nashville, and that's really what started my collection. I've got beer cans from the 1940s, I've got embossed beer bottles from the late 1800s and early 1900s, crocks. A lot of the crocks apparently are being found in the Cumberland River. They were used as bobbers back by fishermen in the early 1900s. The brewery started in 1890 by Christian Moerlein and William Gerst, both from Cincinnati. By 1893, William Gerst bought out Christian Moerlein's interest and operated the brewery solely. Once Prohibition came about in the 1920s and early 30s, the beer production actually stopped. They did non-alcoholic beers and soda. They actually did Orange Crush and some other colas as well. Then in 1933, after Prohibition, they started brewing beer again and was the only brewery in Nashville until the modern-day microbrewery started in the 1980s. The brewery did close in 1954 due to national competition. At that time, the grandson of William Gerst, William J. Gerst, opened the Gerst House restaurant in 1955.
As you can tell, Scott is quite an authority on all things Gerst. He learned so much about the brewery and restaurant that he felt the need to share his discoveries with fellow beer aficionados.
I just started getting more and more knowledge about the brewery, and before I knew it, I knew more about it than it seemed like anyone else. And through encouragement of friends and folks from the Gerst House, I just decided to put all my materials together and publish a book.
That book, Nashville Brewing, contains the pictorial history of the Gerst Brewery and Restaurant. Many of the images in the book are photos of the beautiful lithographs created to promote Gerst beer. Guess what? Scott collects them too.
In my living room, I have about 8 or 9 framed lithographs that were issued in the late 1890s and early 1900s. One of my favorites is the lithograph of the actual brewery, which shows the entire brewery complex, where it took up several blocks on 6th Avenue South here in Nashville. One interesting piece I just recently acquired are these 6 trading cards, which on the front, they just look like little cartoons that you'd give out to any child. And on the back, the 6 cards get put together, and it says, "Compliments William Gerst Brewing Company, Nashville, Tennessee, manufacturers of bottled malt liquid food for family use." You don't see that advertising nowadays. Several of my favorite pieces are the World War II girls that I have. There are 2 self-framed cardboard paintings that were issued in the early 1940s during World War II, and they advertised to support their troops and buy war bonds, and of course advertise the brewery as well.
Gerst may be the focus of Scott's collection, but he also pays homage to Music City's microbreweries.
I do have a few things from the modern-day microbreweries just here in Nashville. I don't want to get into collecting microbreweries from all over the country just because that'd be too much. I don't have enough space.
While Scott's space may be limited, his drive and determination are not. Still true to that 6-year-old boy picking up cans, he scours the globe via his website for the Gerst Brewing Grail that's out there somewhere.
There are several lithographs out there that I'm still trying to obtain that I know exist, but I do not have them in my collection yet, and I'm still always looking.
Oh, that's a great story. I love seeing it again, and I was fascinated by some of the history we touched on. Oh, by the way, did you ever find those lithographs that you were looking for?
I have found several more since then, Joe. I am still always looking. There's one that I know of that a woman in East Tennessee, and maybe she's watching tonight, actually, I'm sorry, in West Tennessee. She has, and she reached out to me after seeing that Tennessee Crossroads episode. And she loves the lithograph. It's the only one I have ever seen. When I did my book, I did not know about it at that time. And so I've tried to buy it from her. She does not want to sell it. She's very happy with it. And of course, I don't, try to push people by any means, but she does have my business card on the back of that painting. And she has told her heirs that at some point, if they don't want it, don't need it, need the money, to reach out to me. So I am always looking.
Always looking. That's the way it is with a collector and aficionado. You also touched on your book, and it's still in print. You still can get copies, can't you?
Yes, yeah, it's still available. It's on Amazon, and I know Walgreens in town still has it. It's amazing. That came out in 2006, and it was purely just, something that my wife encouraged me to do, just because I had the interest in it. But because the craft beer movement has really taken off, the book has continued to be popular.
Well, and I know, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing I was going to add to that, Joe, is it was interesting when Dan and his team were opening up Butchertown Hall, they reached out because there are a number of photographs in this book that they thought, would look good if, hanging in the restaurant because of the theme that Butchertown Hall had in Germantown. And so when they first reached out, we got together and we got a bunch of these photographs blown up and framed. And so the decor of Butchertown Hall is made up all by actual photographs that are published in this book. And it turned out really cool. Looks awesome in there.
Hey, Joe, can you turn your video back on, please?
Is it there?
We can hear you, but we don't see you anymore.
Oh. I can't.
Swipe your finger across it and it should pop up.
No, I can't do it. I don't see anything.
Well, while we're waiting for Joe to get his camera, I will mention, and Dan can talk more about this, but Butchertown Hall has a very eclectic selection of beers that they have both in bottles and on draft there. And they do specialize, as he mentioned, with their food from the Central European and Eastern European immigrants. A lot of their beer styles that they have there represent that same tradition.
Yeah, one of the things that we tried to do early on, well, I should back up. So this weekend actually is our 6-year anniversary.
Wow, that's hard to believe. It's been 6 years.
I know, right? So like those pictures and stuff have been hanging on the wall for 6 years. Yeah, it's crazy to think about. But 6 years ago, in Nashville, there wasn't, Blackstone was here. We had a few breweries open that year. I know Black Abbey and Little Harpeth and a couple other
Jackalope
places.
was around.
Yeah,
Horse
Jackalope
Yazoo,
was here, of course, and Yazoo, and but it was interesting because at the time in brewing, craft beer was blowing up. But it was blown up because everyone wanted to drink IPAs. Everyone wanted a really hoppy beer that was just gonna blow them up with like bitterness and citrus and whatever. And for me, I was like, we shouldn't be doing this. Why is everyone obsessed with these new IPAs in this craft brewing world when there's beers that have been being made for hundreds of years that are really awesome? And, and I'm not knocking craft brewing whatsoever or anything like that. I think it's great. But I do think that there's a little bit of a measuring stick there where you have to say like, okay, we appreciate the fact that these beers have been being made for so long in Germany, so long in Belgium, England, wherever. And so I really kind of made it my own sort of mission to bring some of these beers in that hadn't been in Tennessee yet, not to battle it out with the craft breweries or anything like that, but really just to help open the eyes of the general public to beer that had been being brewed for forever. And look at some of the same things that a lot of the breweries were using as inspiration and bring them in for people to try on their own. And I think it really kind of worked out because it kind of paved the way for like Nashville Brewing Company and, you know, places like that to have a lager that maybe didn't make sense to sell before, but now does, you know?
Exactly. And that brings up a very good point because, as I mentioned earlier, lagers, the difference between a lager and an ale is the yeast. But one thing, lager, as I mentioned, means in German to age or to store. And so lagers take a lot longer time to ferment. Generally, they're taking 4 to 5 weeks to ferment, to sit in one of these big vats behind me, whereas an ale is taking a week to 10 days or so. So, you know, the craft beer industry, just simply because the inventory is sitting in your tanks, it makes sense to brew ales and get them out the door, whereas lagers do take a lot longer to ferment. So it's a lot more money sitting in the tanks. It's inventory sitting in here that we can't sell as it's going through that slow, cold fermentation. So you don't see a lot of craft breweries doing lagers on a regular basis.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, good. Can you see me now?
We can.
Yeah, you're there.
Okay, well, I guess it's time to move on to our third course, Dan. And some might say we saved the best for the last. It looks delicious, smells good, like cinnamon should. Got the sauce to go with it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's a bread pudding. Fairly simple. It's made with the cinnamon bread, a yeast rising cinnamon bread, and our pastry chef Jessica Collins. She's really great. She made this for us. So basically, what you'll want to do is once it's hot, I assume you've heated it here, Joe. You'll want to pour that anglaise over the top of it, which is a bourbon vanilla anglaise. Which is just a fancy word for like sweet, delicious sauce, basically. You know, if you know, in my dictionary, that's what it translates to, basically. Anyway, but yeah, you'll just want to drizzle that on, and yeah, get a spoon or a fork in there, and enjoy it. You know.
Well, I got a spoon here, and I'm going to enjoy it. Wow. Now, I have a lot of crazy friends who drink beer, you know, for breakfast sometimes, but beer with dessert, you know, that's a little new to me and a lot of people. What's up with this selection, Scott?
All right. Well, some may think it's a sweet beer just because it's being served with a dessert, and that's certainly not the case. This particular beer is called Nashville, and it's called Nashville because the style of beer is a Zwickel beer. And Zwickel, Nashville, we didn't really have a choice in calling that. It just kind of flowed that way. But traditionally, a Zwickel beer is a beer that comes out of these lager tanks prior to the beer settling and aging. So compared to your other two beers, this, even though it's a golden color, it is cloudy. So this is a non-filtered beer, and oftentimes will be referred to as a Keller beer. Keller is German for cellar. And the term Zwickel really came from, it's an apparatus called the Zwickelhahn in German, and that is an apparatus used to draw beer out of the tanks. And in the old days, they were big wood vats that were laid down. But they would pull it out to sample the beer and, of course, drink it. And because the lagers didn't have time to settle yet, or the sediment didn't have time to set down while it was lagering, it's a cloudy beer. And this is a beer that most Germans would drink throughout the summer months while that beer was aging in those cellars. They would be drawing out the beer while it was lagering and drinking off it. It's not a common beer here in the United States at all. But if you're in Bavaria or even in the Czech Republic, you'll see a lot of unfiltered lagers, which in Germany they call Zwickel or Keller beers. And most of your Pilsner beers in the Czech Republic are unfiltered, which are very different than the Pilsner style beers that you're accustomed to here in the United States. And I'm going to take a minute and just call my wife out on this. She's listening in right now. She is not a big beer drinker. She'll have a beer every now and then, but you'll notice that on this label is a picture of me with a goat. And this is a very impromptu picture.
I thought that might have been you.
Yeah. So that was an impromptu picture taken. One of our workers here in the brewery, Chris Cooper, he raises goats, and he had brought this baby goat in. It was a special needs goat. You can't tell from the photograph, but its back legs were paralyzed and actually had a little wheelchair that it used. Unfortunately, it died about a week after this picture was taken. But the picture was taken impromptu. We actually submitted our Zwickel beer to the Great American Beer Festival. This was not a beer that was released out to the public. It was just here in the tap room. Well, it won at the Great American Beer Festival, which we were astounded by. And we thought, well, now that it's won, we've got to get it out in the market. And we had to get it out quickly. So, I'm sorry.
This is new to the Nashville area, basically, right? Or when you introduced it, right?
Yeah, when this was first introduced, this, to my knowledge, was the only, or to this day, is still the only Zwickel beer made in Nashville.
Unbelievable.
So when my partners and I, when we decided to put this out, and again, it had to go out quickly. So that shot was chosen, and I did not tell my wife. I thought, sometimes, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission. And
absolutely.
So we were leaving church one day, and a guy comes up and says, "Oh, I had that Zwickel beer. That's a great beer, and I love the picture on the label." My wife said, "Which one's that? Which picture's on the label?" Because as I mentioned before, most of our beers we're very historic to Nashville on the label, such as the Capitol Building. And I think I failed to mention on the Nashville Lager, that's a photograph of the actual Nashville Brewing Company building from the 1880s.
Oh yeah, that's a great shot.
But so he said, "No, the one with you on the label." And of course, my wife looks at me and she's like, "You're on the label of a beer?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that to you." So to this day, like this beer's in Kroger right now. And my mom goes and buys it. And I tell my mom, you don't have to buy the beer. It's, I can get it to you for free. And she says she likes to tell the checkout lady that that's her son on the label. So she buys it.
Good story. Well, that's a good way for her to find out.
Hey, Scott and Joe, we have a question from Kenneth. This is Daniel here.
Yes.
Daniel.
Kenneth would like to know, if lagers are made from just 3 ingredients, how do you come up with different colors?
So the colors in a beer, and this is both with lagers and ales, the color comes from the grain. And most grain in beer is going to be malted barley. In the malting process, in the old days, it would go through and the grains would be roasted. They would spread the grains out on a floor, and this was what they called in a malting house. And the floor, it'd be a wood floor, and it'd have seams underneath like a barn floor, and they would light fires underneath it. Well, they would spray the grains to get them wet and let them germinate. And that was a way to get the optimum sugars. When they start germinating, that's when they have the optimum sweetness. If you think of, you've ever eaten a malted milk ball and you bite in that, you get that sweet powdery flavor. That's what barley malt is. And if we take our grains from our mill back here, we bite into it, it tastes just like that. But the more it would be roasted underneath to dry it out, the darker color would be. Nowadays, they do it in a kiln so we can control the color. Back then, you didn't have a whole lot of control in the Middle Ages. You lit the fire and the smoke, and the beer would be very smoky, but would have a lot of character to it. Nowadays, smoke is not common in beers, although frequently. In fact, we're brewing a Rauch beer tomorrow. Rauch is German for smoke, and it's a smoked beer. But the color comes from how the grain is roasted, just like a coffee bean. The more the coffee bean's roasted, kind of the darker the coffee is going to be.
That's a good answer to a good question. Is there any end to the recipes that you can, and combinations you can come up with for good beer?
When you brew according to that German purity law of that I talked about earlier, it really has those 3 ingredients. The water, and water certainly makes a difference depending where you're located throughout the country and throughout the world. In fact, in Bavaria and in the Czech Republic, only a difference of a couple hundred miles, very, very distinct styles of beer. And they are essentially using the same malt, but the styles are very different. And a lot of that comes from the water softer water versus hard water. So that's one difference. Now you have optimum varieties of malt, different styles of malt, where the grains are grown throughout the country or throughout the world. That makes a difference. And then hops adds a really big characteristic. So you can have thousands of varieties of beer simply from those 3 ingredients. And the 4th ingredient, the magic ingredient, is they didn't know yeast existed back then, but the magic ingredient is yeast. And now that we are able to culture yeast, we're able to grab different flavors from different cultures of yeast. So really you can have thousands and thousands of varieties from these 4 simple ingredients.
Very interesting. Well, and I tell you what, we've learned a lot. We've eaten a lot of good food and had some great fruit. And this has been so much fun.
And one thing I'll add, Joe. So
okay.
This dessert beer we're having, you had initially asked why to pair it with this dessert. And as Dan said, this is a bread pudding, and beer is often referred to as liquid bread.
Yeah.
So I mean, any beer would go with it well, but this particular beer, because it's unfiltered, it's got a little more body and character to it. We feel like it really went well with this dessert.
I think you picked a winner. All of them were winners. The entrees, the appetizer, the dessert. I haven't finished mine, but I will later. And it's been just a great time. And we learned so much about beer and food. And I hope we can do it again sometime. Wouldn't that be great?
Joe.
Yeah, Daniel.
Daniel again. I think, I don't know if Dan is still on, but we have a question from Peterson asking how and what beer is incorporated into Butchertown Hall's menu items. Dan, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hey, Dan. Sorry, I didn't see you on there. Just a question about how you're using beer in your menu.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I think kind of like I was touching on before, I think when we first opened, it was really a mission to kind of bring in some different European styles that maybe people didn't see regularly. And that was kind of at the core of it, but it's also been interesting to bring in, I think everything, there are a ton of beers out there, there's so many varieties, especially when you get into the yeast thing that Scott was just talking about. And you delve into the whole world of like sour beers and the way that bacteria acts on beer and like all that. And there's a lot of people out there that are like super nerds about that, they're all about that. I'm more of like a classic, let's just go with a good straightforward lager for sure. But I think it's really interesting to have a wide variety of beers on the menu, and to find beers that are true to classic styles, but also not to be too strict about it or too uptight about it. I love, Negro Modelo is on our menu, and you buy it at the gas station, everybody knows what Negro Modelo is. There's a lot of people out there that are like craft beer nerds that would be like, why would you put Negro Modelo on your menu? Because it's a good beer. It's just a really great beer. And it's from Mexico, and we have this Tex-Mex, theme. Stone Buenavesa is a really awesome summertime beer. It's got salt and lime already added in the beer. It's a light lager. There's a lot of people that are doing fun stuff with beer now, where they're taking flavors that are naturally into beer, because even when you look at, we look at like German lagers, and it's all very much about like the barley. It's all the barley and the malt. It's all very much about that bready flavor. But then you have like German wheat beers that are all very much about the yeast flavor, and they kind of have this fruity bubblegum flavor. And then you have like the world of Belgian beers that has like just stuff added into it. They get to do that in Belgium because they don't have the Reinheitsgebot laws and stuff. They're like, oh, who cares? Let's just throw in orange peel and clove, coriander, whatever we're gonna do. And there's some really fun stuff that you can get out of all that. And then you've got, of course, these American craft brewers, and there's like a craft brewery on every corner now. And they're just like, yeah, let's do this and that and whatever. Some of my favorites in town, like Southern Grist Brewing, they do a lot of just really fun stuff. You know, or like Smith and Lentz. And but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just these craft guys that are just like, yeah, let's get some chocolate and throw it in the beer. Let's get some, you know, whatever we can find in the back closet and throw it in there. But, you know, so at Butchertown, I do think it's a balance for us, between paying homage to classics, saying these are really respectable beers and beers that everybody should definitely try. But then also, on the other hand, not being too cool for school, you know, just saying like, this beer is really fun and it's really good. And there's no reason why you shouldn't drink it. You know, let's just have some fun with it. And we love to cook with beer too, you know? So
Yeah.
Hey, Daniel, again, we've got another question for you from Paula, just about how exactly did the Butchertown Hall restaurant start? What was the sort of the impetus for starting it?
Well, the owner, founder, Terrell Rayleigh, he actually, he's got a couple other things in town that we've done, but he spent his college years in San Antonio, in that area, and it really kind of put weighed on him heavily, I guess, in a good way. He walked away from that, missing all the tortillas and queso and tacos. And after, I guess, about 20 years here, he decided that he shouldn't go hungry anymore.
Good answer. Well,
Dan, I saw another question, Dan. Someone asked about if your menu is different from the Gerst House menu, which the Gerst House is now closed. I'll let you answer about the difference, and I'd be happy to talk a little bit about how the Gerst House came about and what their menu is about or was about.
Well, yeah, sure. I think, and I mean, obviously, I'm sure you know far more about the Gerst House menu. Sadly, I never actually made it there, but as I understand it, Gerst House was kind of more traditional German food. Exactly, ours is sort of more of an American adaptation of that stuff. So what's
kind of really have the Tex-Mex side of it that the Gerst House did not.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And that's what makes Butchertown fun because, you know, America, the melting pot, you know, we have not just German food and German culture coming into America, but then also this Mexican, another like Latin American culture coming in, and then meeting together in America and creating this style of food that's really unique to that area. I think that's one of the most sort of interesting things about that area and about Butchertown. You know, that's one of the reasons why it's really awesome to have it in Nashville. And so, yeah, you can tell more about the Gerst House menu and how that compares.
And on the flip side, the Gerst House was started in 1955 here in Nashville by the grandson of William Gerst. And the Gerst Brewing Company operated from 1890 to 1954. They actually acquired the Nashville Brewing Company. So the Nashville Brewing Company operated from 1859 until 1890. And then in that exact same location became the William Gerst Brewing Company. And I actually have a historical marker there where both breweries once stood. Unfortunately, it's all been torn down. But the Gerst Brewery then operated until 1954. And William Gerst's grandson opened the Gerst House restaurant in 1955, originally on 2nd Avenue. And ironically, I know 2nd Avenue has been in the news a lot lately since the Christmas Day bombings, but right there, right up at the top of 2nd Avenue, right by the courthouse there was the Gerst House restaurant, and operated from there from 1955 to 1970. And they did serve traditional German food, just German style food. And Nashville went through an urban redevelopment, and that area was rebuilt, and the Gerst House moved across the river, and it operated there from 1970 until the Titan Stadium was built. Mm-hmm. And it got torn down again and rebuilt across the street in its third location, and operated there until it closed about 2 years ago. But again, the Gerst House was more German, traditional German food, whereas Butchertown Hall has that Tex-Mex kind of, a lot of other flavors coming in to complement the German flavors.
Well, another thing, Scott, they don't have that the Gerst House had is the chicken dance. They don't do that at Butchertown Hall, I understand. We did a story. We did a story at the second location. Gosh, about 1990, I guess, and I think they kept that up, throughout the duration of their lifetime, I guess.
Exactly. I moved to Nashville in 1992, and because I had that interest in beer, craft beer was not available yet. There were no breweries in Nashville in 1992, and went to the Gerst House the first weekend I moved here, and of course was very entertained by Mongo and the chicken dance and everything that went on there. But that's where I actually learned that a brewery once operated here in Nashville. And so I learned about the Gerst Brewery, and then I kind of started going backwards, learning about the Nashville Brewing Company and actually other breweries prior to that. So it was just kind of that truly opened my eyes up going to the Gerst House that first time in 1992.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. Any more questions, Daniel?
I don't see any more, Joe. No.
Well, we must have answered them all. I guess these two gentlemen are the experts, and gosh, we got our head full of beer and food knowledge, and it's just been a great time. I guess it's about time for us to say goodbye, but I want to thank everybody out there for joining Dan and Scott and me, and gosh, we've had a great time, and I want to thank you all for participating, and I guess I'll throw it back to you, Daniel Tidwell.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks again to everyone for joining us this evening and supporting Tennessee Crossroads. Special thanks to Scott and Nashville Brewing Company for providing the wonderful beer. We're so appreciative of your support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan King and Butchertown Hall for providing the great food. Thank you so much. You're great partners. As always, thanks to you, Joe. You're a great ambassador for NPT and for Tennessee Crossroads. We so appreciate you and everything that you do. Please, if you are in the Nashville area, check out Butchertown Hall, check out Nashville Brewing Company, go support them. They are fantastic partners of public television for NPT. So if you're into Tennessee Crossroads, into public television, please support those organizations. Thanks again for joining us and for supporting Tennessee Crossroads. Have a great evening, and keep watching NPT and keep watching Tennessee Crossroads. Good night, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Good night.